मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता। मैं भी खाइफ नहीं तख्ताएदार से, मैं भी खाइफ नहीं तख्ताएदार से, मैं भी मंसूर हूँ कह दो अगयार से। क्यों डराते हो, क्यों डराते हो जिंदा की दीवार से, जुल्म की बात को, जहल की रात को। मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता। फूल शाखों पे खिलने लगे, तुम कहो, जामरिंदों को मिलने लगे, तुम कहो। फूल शाखों पे खिलने लगे, तुम कहो, जामरिंदों को मिलने लगे, तुम कहो। जाग सीनों के दिलने लगे, तुम कहो। खुले झूठ को, सहन की लूट को, खुले झूठ को, सहन की लूट को, खुले झूठ को, सहन की लूट को। मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता, मैं नहीं मानता।
Good evening, friends and comrades. Welcome to today's session of Vedika Talks. We have just listened to an energetic number. We do not follow, we do not honor the rules that favor the privileged, is what is the essence of this song. We played it on the request of our speaker today, Abhinav. Abhinav, he himself is the member of this revolutionary rock band, Understood. I am Dr. Suresh. I work as an assistant professor in public health dentistry. And today's session, I am moderating on behalf of the moderators team of Vedika. Before we go on to the talk, let me place certain instructions for the smooth conduction of this session. This is an audio meeting. You cannot see any video. This is parallelly being live streamed on Facebook, Vedika page and Vedika YouTube channel too. We have just shared the links in the Prashnalu Samacharam. You can see that Telugu text here. Excuse us for that, those who cannot read Telugu. So this is the text channel where we exchange the communication. You too can exchange the communication when we invite you to do so. You can see the links here, links for Vedika Facebook page and YouTube channel. And this program is parallelly being live streamed there. If any of your friends are interested to follow this discussion, but for some reason they are not able to join Discord Vedika channel, please share these links to them so that they can follow the discussion. And for you to be able to listen clearly, please join to the device by means of an earphones and use broadband internet so that the discussion can be audible, clear. The moderators team is monitoring this program from different places. If there is any problem on your side, if there is any disturbance in the voice, or if there is any loss of voice, if you have any such problems, please check your internet, please check your device, disconnect and reconnect to the voice channel again. It should solve most of the problems. If the problem still persists, please bring it to our notice by placing a request in the text channel that you can see here. And we invite questions at the end of the talk. Abhinav will answer the questions, but you need to post your questions here in the text channel only after we invite to do so. Posting questions while the talk is progressing will distract the speaker, will distract the co-audience, and it also distracts you because the question that you are just typing may be covered in the very next few minutes. So please note your questions and post them here when we invite the questions. Those who are following the discussion on YouTube and Facebook, you too can ask the questions by posting your questions in the concerned text boxes. Our moderators will take the questions and place them to the speaker. However, the questions asked on Discord channel receive priority. Let's come to the topic today. As we all see, we are going to have a discussion on Lok Sabha elections, Whither fascism. So this is a two-day talk. Today and tomorrow we are going to have a discussion on this. By this time tomorrow, Narendra Modi will be sworn in as the Prime Minister for the consecutive third term. And we have seen dramatic changes unfolding right in front of our eyes over the last few days. NDA is now forming a coalition government from Modi Sarkar. It's going to become NDA Sarkar. During the last 6 weeks of elections, we have seen an unprecedented, an amount that has never been seen, amount of misuse of power by Prime Minister at his personal level and also by various institutions, constitutional institutions, misusing of ED, CBI, Election Commission, manipulations of EVM, and Prime Minister himself resorting to blatant communal hatred. In spite of all these practices, NDA live about their much hyped chas of power. They bagged just 240 seats out of 543 member Lok Sabha, which fell short of the simple majority, so they have to depend upon the coalition. It obviously left a sense of relief among many progressive liberals who are worried about the democracy in India, who are worried about the constitution of India, and who are worried about communal harmony, democratic values. But what does it really mean? What happens to the trajectory of fascism in India? How is this election going to impact the fascism and its manipulations and its way forward in India? Can we really fight fascism by means of elections alone? That in coalition with or in understanding with bourgeois parties. What does it mean for the proletarians? What are the tasks of Indian proletarian, Indian working class to take forward this fight on fascism? What are the international experiences? What does Marxism say about this? These are the questions that we are going to discuss, that Abhinav is going to deal over today and tomorrow. Abhinav is a Marxist theorist. He is the editor of Mazdoor Bigul, a workers' newspaper, and he's also a blogger. He runs Red Polemic blog. We can see him on the same name here. He authored many books and essays on issues related to Marxist theory and Marxist practice of Marxism. He has been actively participated in organizing the workers around certain issues. So, Comrade Abhinav is with us now. Now he will start his talk. Comrade Abhinav, over to you.
Thank you, Comrade Suresh. Let me thank the comrades of Vedika, first of all, to give me this opportunity to share my views with so many comrades about the ongoing political situation in our country. Since my presentation would be basically in three parts. The first part will be the smaller part, very small part, which is about analyzing the election results, because I don't think we should dwell too much upon that, because it is very simple. Despite the internal takeover of state apparatus, suppression of bourgeois opposition, misuse of central agencies, breaking of opposition parties, despite all these machinations, BJP could not get to the majority mark on its own. The slogan of 400 par has become a big joke among people now. But this much is certain, that had it not been for bourgeois opposition, I'm not even talking about the revolutionary forces right now, had it not been for the systematic suppression of bourgeois opposition by sealing the accounts of the Congress, by putting almost half of the top leadership of Aam Aadmi Party into the jails, and breaking the opposition parties like NCP and Shiv Sena, and arm twisting different parties into submission to the BJP's fascist agenda. Despite all these things, despite all these endeavors, BJP failed to get to the majority mark, and had it not been for these machinations, my own assessment is that it was difficult for the BJP to reach even the mark of 200 or 220, something like that. Now the reports are emerging about EVM malfunctioning at different places, more than 70 to 100 seats, and also mismatch in the VVPAT, etc., etc. This is very certain, and this is very discernible for any politically aware person, that BJP has reached this mark of 240 seats only on the basis of various malpractices, electoral malpractices, even from the bourgeois democratic standpoint. And it could not have reached this figure without that. But when you are analyzing fascism in the 21st century, you have to take into account all these machinations beforehand. You cannot proceed to analyze the rise of fascism to power in 21st century without taking all these elements into consideration a priori beforehand. So one cannot say that, had these conditions been fulfilled, BJP would not have come to power. The coming to power of BJP using all these methods and machinations is inherent and immanent part of the methodology of fascism in 21st century. So you cannot just hand wave things about it. It is very clear that it is intrinsic part, an immanent part of the methodology of fascism today. Now, when the election results have been declared, and now it is very clear that at least for now, uh, BJP is going to form the government, this coalition government, NDA government, with the support of Telugu Desam Party and JDU in principle, because all the rest of the constituent elements of NDA themselves are not in a position to bring BJP to power. The support of TDP and JDU is essential, and for now, it is certain that Modi is going to take oath tomorrow, and third term of Modi as Prime Minister will begin tomorrow. Now, this leads to many possibilities. What could happen in the future? First, let me dwell on these possibilities. First possibility is that Modi-Shah combined might continue to compromise with the TDP and JDU, with Nitish Kumar and Chandrababu Naidu, and even compromise on some of the core issues of BJP's politics, like Agniveer and CA, NRC, and all of that. They might backtrack on that. They might retreat on that, and they might compromise with Nitish and Chandrababu Naidu to maintain their power. In that case, it is very clear that the kind of Führer cult that Modi and Sangh Parivar and BJP have built around Narendra Modi, that would, face an irreparable damage. If Modi continues to compromise with Nitish and Chandrababu Naidu to maintain himself as Prime Minister, then that image of a supreme fascist leader, of that Führer, will face irreparable damage. There is no doubt about it. Secondly, the fascist aggressiveness of Modi government also might see a temporary, decline. What will not change, in my opinion, in a qualitative manner is the implementation of the neoliberal economic policies, the anti-working class, anti-working masses policies of the government, because on that question, all the bourgeois parties, with quantitative difference, share their ideas, because that is the need of bourgeoisie right now, the implementation of neoliberal policies. Secondly, people should also not be misled to believe that the aggressiveness of the fascist stormtrooper brigades like Bajrang Dal, VHP, ABVP, that would decrease definitively. I'm not sure about it, and we should not take it for granted that since the coalition government is in power, the aggressiveness of the fascist goon brigades, the Gunda brigades of fascist Sangh Parivar, will decrease qualitatively, because those of us who were, who had already matured during the period of Vajpayee's government might remember that even Vajpayee's government was a coalition government, but the aggressiveness of fascist stormtroopers increased during that period, and that might be the case today also. Even with the continuation of this coalition government, the aggressive fascist terror tactic used by different fascist goon brigades might continue with quantitative increase or quantitative decrease. That is not about that we cannot speculate, but that might continue. So the two things that will continue in the most likelihood is the continuation of the pro-capital, pro-big capital specifically, but pro-capital in general policies of the present dispensation, and the continued aggressiveness of the fascist stormtroopers like Bajrang Dal, VHP, etc. The only thing that might change is that the open attacks on minority rights and civil rights, democratic rights, the rate or rhythm of that might decelerate due to the compulsions imposed by continuing a coalition government. So that is the first possibility. The coalition government continues. Modi-Shah combined are obliged to make certain compromises and give a leeway to the coalition partners like Chandrababu Naidu and Nitish Kumar. In that case, these possibilities are there. The second broad possibility is that, learning from the experience of their own fascist forefathers, the Modi-Shah combine, using its deep infiltration into the state apparatus and consolidated positions in the civil society, they might resort to a tactic which is something like fire in the Reichstag. Those who are familiar with the history of fascism in the first part of the 20th century might do well to recall that when Hitler came to power third time, in fact, his mandate was decreased. He was obliged to form coalitions with different parties like DVP and all. And it was precisely this last tenure of Hitler during which the fire at Reichstag happened. He first introduced some emergency measures and then imposed the exceptional laws. So the Modi Shah combine also might resort to that kind of a tactic by using people like Ajit Doval and all, and some big attack on some parliamentary institution or some government institution, or a life attempt at some fascist leader like Modi himself might happen, in which definitely he would survive. By using that kind of a scenario, they can, in the name of national security and all, they can introduce some emergency-like situation in order to, develop full control over the coalition government. Even in that case, they would not do away with the shell of bourgeois democracy. They would not introduce any systematic exceptional laws by which they will, decisively end bourgeois processes and bourgeois institutions like parliament, bourgeois elections. They would not do that, in my opinion. But temporarily, they can impose an emergency-like situation in which they would try to buy time to consolidate themselves and develop their control over the coalition government. I'm not saying that they would be successful in that. Their success, prospective success or prospective failure, will depend on a variety of factors. But I'm just saying that they might try something like that. That is the second possibility that I can foresee right now. The third possibility is that Modi Shah combine might try to run the government in the same old fascist fashion in which they had been running their government in the last 10 years, with the same fascist aggressiveness, but due to being held back by the allies and due to being, arm twisted by the allies like Nitish and Chandrababu Naidu, because they have their own social base to which they have to respond in the next elections. In that scenario, Modi might, from a condescending position, from a vantage point, just like Vajpayee did during its first 13-day tenure, might say that I'm going to resign, I'm going to submit my resignation to the president, because these forces who are supporters of infiltrators and those who recreate more in this allusion to Muslims, he might say that due to their pressure, I'm not being able to serve the national interest. I'm not being able to serve the nation properly, and therefore I'm going to submit my resignation to the president, and I'm calling for mid-term elections. But for that, he will wait till the time when the fascist forces are in a position to erect a new fascist frenzy, build a new fascist crescendo, so that in the mid-term elections, Modi, most probably, or some other fascist Führer, might come back to power with a thumping majority. That is the third possibility, in which he might submit his resignation, fuel the flames of communalism and jingoism, and then riding the wave of communalism and jingoism, might try to win majority in a midterm election. That is the third possibility that I can see. The fourth possibility is that the Modi government might fall due to withdrawal of support by Nitish and Naidu, who might withdraw the support by saying that the secular agenda is being compromised, etc., blah, blah, blah. But using different kind of pretexts, they might withdraw the support, and then they might extend their support to the India bloc, and with the support of some other smaller opposition parties and some independents, India bloc might form the government before the end of the tenure of the 18th Lok Sabha. After that, a lot of things might happen. The India government might complete the tenure of the 18th Lok Sabha, or it might fall before that, leading to the midterm elections again. In any case, this much is certain, that the fascists, either with the possibility of India bloc government running for the entire tenure or falling before the end of the tenure, the fascists might rise again to power with increased ferocity and aggressiveness. Because any interregnum of welfareism, any interregnum of any other kind of policies, non-fascist policies, will only exacerbate the contradictions of capitalist system, the capitalist economy, in the context of ongoing long depression, the long crisis. So we cannot speculate further than that. These are the broad possibilities which might realize, uh, resulting from the present political situation. Now, in any case, this much is certain, that electoral decline or defeat of fascism cannot be considered the decisive defeat of fascism. Uh, in order to understand this, we need to understand that the 21st century fascism is characterized by an internal takeover of the state apparatus, bourgeois state apparatus, the consolidation of their positions in the society through a long period of positional warfare. And even if they go out of government by losing an election, they will only go out of government to come back again into the government with increased aggressiveness and ferocity. And even when they are in government, they are not going to do away with the shell or the form of bourgeois democracy. This much we can be fairly certain about. Why I'm saying this? To understand that, we need to understand the peculiarities of fascism in the 21st century. So, this is the first part of the discussion where we are dwelling upon the potential possibilities that might arise out of the present political situation, where NDA is forming government with the support of Nitish Kumar and Chandrababu Naidu. We talked about four possibilities, but at the end of uh, realization of any of these possibilities, we can be fairly certain about the fact that fascism is here to stay. Fascism, in or out of government, doesn't matter. They will remain in their consolidated positions within the state apparatus, which they have developed in the last 7-8 decades. They will continue to maintain their consolidated position in the civil society, which they have developed specifically in the last 5-6 decades through their institutionalized reform work and cultural work. They would maintain those positions, and they would wait for the next opportunity when they can make good of the political crisis of the bourgeois state and come back again into the government. Now, the second part of the presentation that I'm going to start is simply this: to understand the peculiarities of fascism in the 21st century, or to be more accurate, the peculiarities or particular characteristics of fascism since the last quarter of the 20th century and the 21st century, we need to understand two things. First, we need to understand the universalities or generalities of fascism. What is the meaning of universalities and generalities of fascism? It simply means the general universal characteristics of fascist rise, irrespective of time and space. Whether you talk about the rise of Nazi party to power, or whether you talk about the rise of fascist party to power in Italy, whether you talk about the rise of regimes like quasi-fascist and fascist regimes like Salazar's regime in Portugal in the early 20th century, for the first part of 20th century, or you are talking about Horthy's quasi-fascist regime in Hungary in the first part of the 20th century. There are certain universal and general characteristics which you will find in any and all instances of fascist rise. So first, we need to understand those universal characteristics of fascism, and only then we can understand the particular characteristics of fascism, especially in the phase of neoliberal globalization, this latest phase of the stage of imperialism. There are certain changes which characterize the fascist rise, especially since the last decades of the 20th century. And we need to understand those changes because these changes are qualitative changes, not simply some quantitative changes. But in order to understand these peculiarities of 21st century fascism, first we need to understand the general and universal characteristic of fascism. What is fascism in general? That is the second part of my presentation. Now, we have been saying this since 2008-9, when in 2009, United Progressive Alliance government led by the Congress Party won its second tenure. The bulk of left intelligentsia, the bulk of liberal left, left liberal, and liberal intelligentsia went into a euphoria. They claimed that it is the decisive defeat of fascism. Now the fascists have lost second consecutive elections. Now we can stay assured that it is the definitive end of fascism in Indian politics, etc., etc. At that point, we had written a book which is called "What is Fascism and How to Fight It," and we clearly warned against this premature celebration, and we said that it is not, this electoral defeat is not the end of fascism at all. And we need to understand the peculiarities of 21st century fascism to understand why it is not the defeat of fascism. And in 2009 also, we began our discussion by discussing the universal characteristics or general characteristics of fascism. So what are these general characteristics of fascism? The first most important general or universal characteristic of fascism is that the fundamental contradiction which is behind the rise of fascism is always economic crisis of capitalism, the capitalist crisis. Why I am saying the fundamental contradiction, not principal contradiction? Because economic crisis does not give rise to fascism necessarily in all countries. But without this context or background of capitalist economic crisis, there can be no fascist rise. We don't have any example of fascist rise in the history of modern capitalist world where fascism came to power or fascism rose as a reactionary social movement without the background of capitalist economic crisis. So we need to understand this dialectic. On the one hand, economic crisis as the fundamental contradiction directly necessarily doesn't lead to fascist rise, but fascist rise itself is not possible without the background of economic crisis. Now, in a certain situation, particular conjuncture of contradictions, which come into existence due to the background of economic crisis, a political crisis of bourgeois state might develop in certain countries. The emergence of this conjuncture of contradictions leading to a political crisis of bourgeois state leads to emergence of different exceptional forms of bourgeois rule or bourgeois dictatorship. Why we call it exceptional form? Because in such a situation of political crisis and economic crisis, it is no more possible for the bourgeois state to collectivize the interests, long-term general political interests of different blocks of bourgeoisie through regular means of multi-party bourgeois democracy. It becomes virtually impossible to collectivize the bourgeois interests and package them as national interests using regular and preferred means of multi-party bourgeois democracy. This leads to a political crisis, and this political crisis can be resolved by different forms of exceptional bourgeois dictatorship. Different exceptional forms of bourgeois dictatorship. Nikos Poulantzas, the Greek Marxist political scientist, he talked about three exceptional forms of bourgeois dictatorship. One is military dictatorship, military junta. The other is a Bonapartist dictatorial regime. And the third is fascist dictatorship. We might add a fourth, a religious fundamentalist regime of the Khomeini type, the Iranian Khomeini type regime. You can add that to the exceptional forms of bourgeois dictatorship. So the political crisis is resolved by this or that exceptional form of bourgeois rule. Now, which exceptional form comes into existence and is materialized in any particular country depends on the history and politics of that particular country. But this much we need to understand right now, that fascism is a product of economic crisis which is congealed into a political crisis by conjuncture of various contradictions. So economic crisis, this is the first universal characteristic of fascism which is present in every fascist rise. Economic crisis plays the role of the fundamental contradiction which creates the general historical conditions in which a fascist regime might come into existence. That is the first important thing that we need to understand. Why it happens? Because economic crisis is nothing but the tendential decline in the average rate of profit. It is the crisis of profitability. Now, the crisis of profitability in the absence of any considerable development in the productive forces, which would increase the rate of surplus value and which would accelerate the rate of surplus value faster than the rate of increase in the organic composition of capital. Those who are students of Marxist political economy would understand that. But those who don't understand that, forget about it. The main thing is that if there is a crisis of profitability, then the bourgeoisie requires certain things. The most important of those things is depression in the average wages, which can be realized only by systematic attacks on the labor rights, on the rights of the working people. That is the first thing. The second thing that the bourgeoisie requires is continued privatization of the commons. That is, those natural resources which have till now been used as commons by the masses at large are privatized to a greater degree. The forest rights are taken away, the collective communal control over different natural resources is taken away by privatization. This process happens even in the advanced capitalism. It is not something, it is basically a continuation of primitive accumulation. That is, taking away the means of production and means of consumption from the direct producers. Some people think that this process, once it is completed, only then the history of capitalism begins. That is not true. History of capitalism begins with primitive accumulation, but it doesn't mean that primitive accumulation itself belongs to the primitive period of capitalism. It might continue even in the advanced stages of capitalism, and it has indeed continued in the advanced capitalist countries as well as even in the US or Germany or France. You might have heard about this gas pipeline in the US, for which many petty small producers are being uprooted. This process is an ongoing process. It is still ongoing. So this primitive accumulation is the second thing which the bourgeoisie needs when it is faced with the economic crisis of decline in the average rate of profit. The third thing which it needs is that a farewell to welfare policies. Basically, end of whatever remains of the welfarist policies of the bourgeois state, because that puts fiscal burden in the bourgeois sense on the state, and the bourgeoisie needs all those resources which are being spent in the welfarist policies for its own good. For example, getting getting more freedom from direct and corporate taxation, getting more freedom, getting loan waivers, etc., etc. For all that, it is necessary that the state decreases its expenditure on welfarist policies and puts the burden of corporate loot and plunder on the working masses by decreasing direct taxes and corporate taxes and increasing indirect taxes across slabs. So all these policies which the bourgeoisie needs in times of crisis require what they call strong leadership. And that strong leadership, nobody ever talks about for whose or to whose interest this strength serves, but an image, a fetishistic and ideological image of a strong leadership which will do away with policy paralysis, etc., etc., is That is what the bourgeoisie needs in times of crisis. And that can be done only by a military dictatorship like their military dictatorship till the end of the 1980s or 1990s in South Korea, or Pinochet's military junta, or a fascist regime. Any exceptional form of bourgeois dictatorship. And it depends on the particular history and politics of particular countries, whether military junta will come into power to deal with the political crisis of bourgeoisie in times of economic crisis, or some fascist regime will come into power, or some religious fundamentalist regime of Khomeini type will come into power, or some kind of Bonapartist regime will come into power. That depends on the particular historical condition of a country. So the first important thing to understand, that the first universal characteristic of fascism is economic crisis. That is the fundamental contradiction behind the rise of fascism in any case. The second universality of fascist rise in any case is the fascist ideology. Now, we need to understand that fascist ideology is not just any bourgeois reactionary ideology. It's a very particular kind of bourgeois ideology. Now, what are the salient features of this reactionary bourgeois ideology, this fascist ideology? I'm talking about its functions, the basic functions or basic features of this fascist ideology. The first important salient feature, if you take any example of fascist rise, is construction of a false or imaginary enemy. They will construct an image of the other, an image of a false enemy in the figure of a Jew or a Muslim or an immigrant. So the fascist ideology might take the form of any social chauvinist ideology, like xenophobic. It can be xenophobic fascism, it can be racist fascism, it can be communal fascism, depending on the particular historical conditions of each country. The fascist ideology assumes different cloaks, if you will, or different facade, if you will. So the first characteristic feature of fascist ideology is construction of a false or imaginary enemy. The second feature is that blaming this false enemy for the socio-economic problems and crises created by capitalist system. The socio-economic insecurity, the socio-economic uncertainty, unemployment, price rise, homelessness, malnutrition, starvation, etc., etc. All these problems, then the fascist vanguard or the fascist party blames on this imaginary or constructed false enemy. This is the second character. The third characteristic is that in distinction to this false enemy, fascist ideology always constructs a purely ideological community. Purely ideological community means that a fetishistic community which has nothing real about it. Purely ideological. A purely ideological community like German Aryan nation or Hindu Rashtra, the members of which have nothing in common with each other except what they are not. For example, members of Hindu Rashtra have nothing in common except they are not Muslim. Right? Or the members of German Aryan nation have nothing in common. They themselves are a highly class differentiated entity, but what they have in common is simply this, that they are not Jew. Or today, in the case of various versions of xenophobic fascism which are emerging in even Western Europe, what they share, that you are not an immigrant. The members of this purely ideological community do not share anything else among themselves. So they create, this is the third characteristic feature of fascist ideology. They create a purely ideological community like Hindu Rashtra or German Aryan race or nation, something like that. The fourth important characteristic feature of fascist ideology is that the fascist supreme leader or Führer is constructed as the sole spokesperson of this purely ideological community. So Narendra Modi becomes the sole spokesperson of the entire Hindu Rashtra, Hindu community. And he is constructed as the Hindu Hriday Samrat, who is the sole spokesperson, the sole, supreme leader with this divine aura. The attempt of Modi to present himself as avatar, in fact, that is not the invention of Modi's mind. There is a small section in the fascist support base of the communal consensus that the fascists have created in a long, protracted process. A small portion of that fascist consensus actually believes that Modi is avatar of Vishnu or something like that, a divine incarnation, if you will. So that Führer with this divine aura is constructed as the sole spokesperson of the majoritarian community, that purely ideological community that we talked about just before this. And the fifth and the last characteristic of fascist ideology is that once they have constructed this image of false enemy, once they have constructed blamed this false enemy for all the socio-economic problems created by capitalism, once they have constructed a purely ideological community in the shape of Hindu Rashtra or something like that, and once they have constructed the figure of the Führer as the sole spokesperson of this purely ideological community, they designate anyone who opposes the fascist Führer and the fascist organization as the enemy of the majoritarian community. So the figure of the enemy is swiftly expanded to include everyone who opposes BJP or RSS or Modi. So if you criticize Modi, you are anti-Hindu. If you criticize RSS and BJP and its policies, then you are anti. You automatically become anti-Hindu. It's like commonsensical, which doesn't need any factual or logical explanation. It is just out there and you have to obey it, just like a hegemonic common sense. So the figure of enemy is expanded to include all kinds of opposition within the bourgeois politics as well as outside the bourgeois politics, that is revolutionary or progressive politics. So every kind of opposition is very soon included into the figure of the enemy. So the figure, now the enemy is not simply Jew, it is Jew, communists, immigrants, etc., etc., etc. So these are the five basic characteristic features of fascist ideology, and it is this fascist ideology which is one of the differentia specifica of fascism. It differentiates or distinguishes fascism from all other forms of rabid right-wing bourgeois reaction. It's not just any bourgeois reactionary ideology. If you want to fight against fascism, you have to understand the peculiar features of bourgeois the fascist ideology. Now we come to the third universal feature of fascism. The third universal feature of fascism is a cadre-based organization. It is the other important differential specifica of fascist politics. This particular form of bourgeois right-wing reaction. Now, if you look at any fascist rise, it is always led by a fascist vanguard, which is modeled after a cadre-based organization. This cadre-based organization has certain defining features. One defining and the first and the most important defining feature is complete absence of internal democracy. In any fascist organization, you will find a sheer absence of democracy. The second important feature is full allegiance to the fascist Führer, the supreme leader, and the clique around that fascist leader, and a complete obedience to that leadership. This is what distinguishes a fascist cadre organization from a communist cadre organization. Communist parties are also cadre-based organizations, and in fact, the fascists learned this at the level of only form, not essence. At the level of form, they learned the importance and effectiveness of a cadre-based organization from Communist Party. Mussolini, before he formed Fascist Party, was a member of Socialist Party of Italy, which was one of the origin points of later formed PCL, Communist Party of Italy. So, in fact, Gramsci himself was member of PSI, and both of them were at one point of time comrades in arms. But both parted their ways. Gramsci developed towards a Leninist form of Marxism, and Mussolini went to found the Fascist Party. But This is one thing among two important things. I will come to the second important things later. The two important things which the fascist party learned from communists. One of that is cadre-based organization. So this is the third important characteristic, universal feature of fascism. The fourth important, and maybe the most important in some sense, important general universal feature of fascism is that unlike other forms of right-wing bourgeois reactions, far-right bourgeois reaction, fascism is a reactionary social movement. It is a reactionary social movement of petty bourgeoisie, which has impact on certain sections of working class also. Two parts of the working class to be precise. One is a part of the labor aristocracy, the well-paid organized labor, which has become partially, in some sense, in a vulgar economic sense, in terms of money, sum of money that they are receiving. In that sense, that part of organized labor, which politically forms the labor aristocracy, that becomes one of the potential support bases of fascism. The second part of the working class, part of which, not entire, but part of which becomes a potential social base for fascism is lumpen proletariat. Marx defined lumpen proletariat precisely by its being completely bereft of proletarian consciousness. So, in terms of social class, it is part of proletariat, but it lacks any working class consciousness, any proletarian consciousness. Not even the rudimentary form of proletarian consciousness are developed in the lumpen proletariat. So, a class bereft of class consciousness, so to, if you will. So, these two sections of the working class, parts of these two sections become potential social base of a reactionary social movement of petty bourgeoisie that fascism is. But in terms of political character, not in terms of social base, in terms of political character, fascism, unlike other forms of bourgeois reaction, is not simply an authoritarian regime. It is characterized, this authoritarian regime is supported by, it is, backed by a reactionary social movement of the petty bourgeoisie. It is a romantic, mystical upheaval of the petty bourgeoisie. Why I am calling it romantic and mystical? Because the sections of petty bourgeoisie which become part of the social base of fascism, they become part of social base of fascism due to a misarticulation of class contradictions by fascist forces. Petty bourgeoisie itself is a victim of capitalism. Many people think that petty bourgeoisie means small capitalist class. That is not correct. Small capitalist class is an exploiter of labor power, even if at a smaller scale, but it is still exploiter of labor power. Petty bourgeoisie, if we are not using this term loosely, or if we are not using this term in a descriptive fashion, then petty bourgeoisie, if we are using the accurate political economic terminology, it is the class which neither exploits the wage labor of others regularly, nor it sells its wage labor to others. It is basically a class of petty commodity producers. It is the class of functionaries of capital, like in the bourgeois state apparatus, paid employees, etc., etc. But mainly petty bourgeoisie is characterized by that. But petty bourgeoisie, especially lower echelons of petty bourgeoisie, are not beneficiary of capitalist system. They face social and economic insecurity precisely because of the natural motion of capitalist mode of production. When they are faced with economic and social insecurity in a protracted period, they live in a constant, mood, if you will, of irritation and reaction. Fascism only gives a false enemy to this blind reaction. This class of petty bourgeoisie, which is not totally uprooted, but it is constantly threatened with the possibility of proletarianization, which is their worst nightmare of the middle classes. It is not completely proletarianized, but it is constantly faced with the threat of proletarianization. Some part of it, obviously, of course, it also gets proletarianized, but as a class, the entire petty bourgeoisie is never proletarianized. Capitalism, by its natural motion, maintains this social class in a dynamic, fluid state. Its boundaries demographic boundaries keep changing, but petty bourgeoisie remains in capitalism because it has a social and political function in the capitalist system. So this petty bourgeoisie faced with this threat is driven into the arms of fascist reaction because the fascist vanguard creates this image of a false enemy and misarticulates the real class contradictions into communal or racial contradictions by using this social chauvinist ideology of racism or communism. So this petty bourgeoisie, in a sense, is driven into the arms of reaction, fascist reaction, against its own real class interests. Its perceived class interests are now misarticulated and they are converted into some kind of xenophobia or anti-Muslim communalism or racism against Jews or Roma community or this xenophobic frenzy against immigrants. Any thing is possible in that. So this is the fourth important characteristic, that fascism is not just any bourgeois reaction, it is a reactionary social movement of petty bourgeoisie. It's a mystical and romantic upheaval of the petty bourgeoisie, which is erected on the basis of real class contradictions into communal contradiction or racial contradiction or the contradiction between against the immigrants. The fifth important universal characteristic of fascism, that is fascism. It is the historical function of fascism to weld this petty bourgeois reaction to the interests of capital in general and big capital in particular. Let me repeat this sentence. It is the historical function of fascism as a extreme right-wing reactionary bourgeois movement and ideology and politics to weld the petty bourgeois reaction, which emerges especially in times of capitalist crisis, with the interests of capital in general and big capital in particular. It puts the petty bourgeois reaction into the service of the interests of capital. That is the historical function of fascism. So these are the five universal characteristic features of fascism, the universal differentia specifica of fascism, which distinguishes or differentiates fascism from all other forms of extreme right-wing bourgeois reaction. These understanding these five universalities of fascism, generalities of fascism, is essential for any revolutionary communist if they are not involved in developing some kind of academic understanding of fascism, but a very active, dynamic, revolutionary understanding of fascism in order to organize the masses against fascism. If we want to organize the masses against fascism, we have to understand these peculiarities, general peculiarities of fascism. Now, these five characteristic elements can be called the constitutive elements of fascism. They constitute fascism. They are constitutive of fascism. They were present in the 20th century fascism, early 20th century fascism, and they are present in today's fascism also. This brings us to the question of what has changed in the nature and character of fascism. What has changed in the modus vivendi, that is, mode of existence of fascism, and the modus operandi, that is, the mode of working of fascism. What are these changes in the modus vivendi and the modus operandi of fascism, especially since the last quarter of 20th century? That is, after the depression, the capitalist crisis, which began in the early 1970s. There are many changes in the rise, character, and nature of the rise of fascism. Now, many people in India as well as in world where there is a looming fascist threat or there is a fascist party in power, they are waiting for something of the sorts to happen, which happened in the Italy of 1920s or the Germany of 1930s. They are waiting for concentration camps to recur in the same form. They are waiting for same set of exceptional laws that Mussolini introduced in 1920s in Italy and Hitler introduced in the early 1930s in Germany. They are waiting for fascism to repeat itself in the same way. But as Marx said, history never repeats itself as it is. First, it happens as tragedy, then as farce. This is a very philosophical sentence. What it means, we cannot go into the depth of that, but this much is certain that those who are in an inverted fashion, waiting for Godot to arrive, waiting for fascism in its 20th century form to arrive again in the 21st century, will be disappointed because I don't think that day is going to come in most likelihood. Or only in the exception of exceptions, it might happen for a small period or a small, say a small interregnum. But in general, that kind of repeat is not going to happen. Fascism is not going to occur or take place or materialize in exactly the same form by forming some Auschwitz or doing away with bourgeois parliament and bourgeois assemblies and bourgeois elections and putting a formal ban on all of that and introducing some set of exceptional laws which would that is not going to happen. Why that is not going to happen? Now we are going to understand that. We understood the five universal characteristic features of fascism. Now we are going to understand the five defining particular characteristic features of fascism in the late 20th century and in the 21st century. To be more precise, rise of fascism in the latest phase of the stage of imperialism. What is that latest phase? That latest phase is neoliberal globalization. The phase of neoliberal globalization, that the highest phase of imperialist stage. What are these changes? Since the end of the Second World War, the world capitalism has undergone, profound changes. What are these changes? There are certain qualitative changes in the modus operandi of capitalist mode of production. There are important quantitative changes. There are changes in the modus operandi of bourgeois state power. There are qualitative changes in the way in which capitalist crisis occurs. There is fundamental changes in the nature and character of capitalist crisis. Due to all these changes, the rise of fascism also has underwent the character and the nature of rise of fascism has undergone profound changes. Now we come to the first change. We talked about economic crisis as the fundamental contradiction behind the rise of fascism. Now, since the last quarter of the 20th century, the very nature of capitalist crisis has undergone an important change. What is that change? Before we discuss that, I would like to remind our comrades who are familiar with Capital. In the third volume of Capital, in one of his editorial notes, Engels made certain predictions, or you can call them scientific anticipations. What was this scientific anticipation? Engels said that the boom bust cycle, the cycle of crisis and periods of prosperity, do not form a circle, they form a spiral. With every round, the capitalist crisis becomes more extensive and more intensive. It becomes deeper with every round of the circle, with every round of the spiral. Here, Engels very clearly in this editorial note said that we are coming to a phase, and we have been witnessing this from the first recorded crisis of capitalist world in the decade of 1810. We have been witnessing that the phases of capitalist crisis in the spiral are getting lengthened. They are getting lengthier. They are getting more protracted. Whereas the periods of boom or prosperity are becoming contracted. So in the future, this tendency is going to increase, and we will become witness to long depressions, long periods of crisis where a mild recession will continue, and it will degenerate into serious depressions periodically. This is what Engels wrote in the editorial note that he added to the third volume of Capital, uh, which were scattered manuscript compiled and edited by Engels, because Marx did not live to edit and compile. He only compiled parts of second volume of Capital and entire first volume of Capital, but the third volume was completely edited and compiled from very chaotic and anarchic set of manuscripts left behind by Marx. So it is full, it is peppered with very important and very interesting editorial comments of Engels, and one of the comments says this, which I just stated. This prediction of Engels was fully confirmed by the actual experience of history. Since the 1970s, when the long period of boom, which came into existence due to the large-scale destruction of Europe and Japan in the Second World War, when that long period of prosperity known as golden era in the history of US capitalism, when it came to end by the end of the decade of 1960s, and its open explosion into a big capitalist crisis in 1973 with the collapse of dollar gold standard and then the OPEC oil crisis. Since that time, the entire world capitalist system has not become witness to any significant period of economic prosperity or boom. Since the 1973 crisis, we are witnessing a long recession, which is peppered with some serious collapses, some serious depressions. For example, 1987 collapse, then 1997 collapse, and then 2007 collapse, which was the biggest milestone in this long recession, which inaugurated what Marxist political economists like Anwar Sheikh have called the Great Depression, the first Great Depression of the 21st century, which started with the 2007 subprime crisis, the busting of the subprime bubble. Since that period, the world capitalist system witnessed only one small period of prosperity and boom. When 1973 crisis happened, the bourgeoisie in different countries, the advanced capitalist countries, as well as the relatively backward post-colonial capitalist countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, Mexico, Turkey, etc., etc. In all these countries, the bourgeoisie responded sooner or later. The first countries to respond in that fashion were America and Britain. People might have heard about the terms Reaganomics and Thatcherism. What were these set of policies known as Reaganomics and Thatcherism? They were a neoliberal reactionary response to the crisis of 1973. 1973 capitalist world hit a bottleneck, faced a crisis of profitability. There were no major advancements in the productive forces which could have raised the bar in terms of raising the productivity of labor and increasing the rate of surplus value. Whereas on the other hand, the organic composition of capital was increasing steadily and then very swiftly just before the 1973 crisis, during the golden period. The organic composition of capital was increasing very swiftly, whereas the rate of the surplus value was not increasing swiftly, which led to the decline, very swift decline in the average rate of profit towards the end of the 1960s, which created a crisis of profitability. Now, this crisis of profitability could be done away with only by two things. Either you increase the rate of surplus value faster than the rate of increase in the organic composition of capital. That is possible only in the periods of major technological invention and major inventions in the fields of productive forces. That period has not happened in capitalism since 1970s, 80s. There are changes, IT revolution, communication revolution, etc. And they have increased the productivity of labor, but the organic composition of capital also has increased due to precisely the same factors in a much faster way. So crisis of profitability was relieved for a short period of 8 to 10 years since the mid 1970s to the mid 1980s. But except that period of the first phase of neoliberal offensive, the crisis of profitability has remained throughout. And this crisis of profitability has become, you can say, uh, a protracted feature, not permanent feature, but a protracted feature of the neoliberal phase of capitalism. Now we are in the phase where this long recession is continuing. It is peppered with some long depressions, but this long recession is not going away. Why? Because there is not sufficient destruction of productive forces. A sufficient destruction of productive forces happened in the First World War and in the Second World War, which led to the post-war boom. But now there is a very faint possibility of a third world war. One reason for that is also the nuclear deterrent. Even the major capitalist powers understand that they have to keep uh, their conflicts within the ambit of regional theaters of war. So one regional theater of war is Ukraine, one regional theater of war is Middle East, one regional theater of war might develop in the Pacific eventually, but uh, the the possibility of development of these regional theaters of war, these uh, sharpening inter-imperialist contradictions into a full-fledged world war after the model of the World War, Second World War, or First World War, there is a very small possibility of that. I wouldn't say that there is no possibility, but that possibility is not the major possibility. So there is no sufficient destruction of productive forces. There is not sufficient devalorization of capital, which restores profitability. And therefore, this mild recession, you can expect this to continue for a protracted period. Since the crisis itself is not now characterized by a cataclysmic rise or a sudden or contingent rise and a contingent end. The fascism too is not characterized by a cataclysmic rise and a cataclysmic fall. This is a very important point that we need to understand because the nature and character of crisis itself has changed. Now we are not uh, becoming witness to frequently alternating cycles of boom and bust. We are living in the period of long recession peppered with serious collapses, long depressions, and this period in most likelihood is going to continue for a protracted period unless and until there is a sufficient destruction of productive forces and sufficient devalorization of capital. The possibility is very less, and this brings us to the second characteristic feature of fascism in the 21st century. Since the very nature of crisis has changed, now the 21st century fascism also, the way it occurs, the way it materializes has changed. Now the fascism is not characterized by a cataclysmic and sudden rise and equally cataclysmic and sudden fall. Rather, it is characterized by a long incubation period in which the fascist forces perform a molecular permeation into the state as well as society. Now, let me elaborate this. In this long incubation period, the fascist organization consolidates its position in the civil society. What is civil society? Civil society for Marx is a bourgeois society, a society based on the property relations of bourgeoisie. That is what civil society is. Now, this term is used and abused and misused in innumerable ways. For Hegel as well as for Marx, that's what civil society meant. So in the civil society, or you can simply say in the society, in this long incubation period, the fascist forces perform a molecular permeation. They permeate at the levels of molecules. They permeate through their institutional reform work in the neighborhoods. They permeate through their cultural work, their reactionary cultural work in the neighborhoods, and they develop and build institutions at the level of neighborhoods, and through those this institutionalized reform work and institutionalized cultural work, the fascist forces consolidate their positions in the society. You can compare it with digging trenches in a war. That's what Gramsci compared the positional warfare. So it's kind of a positional warfare that fascist forces are involved through decades. It's not a cataclysmic rise of fascism and cataclysmic fall, but in a long incubation period, fascist forces infiltrate the state apparatus in a very systematic and planned way. So they will build their military schools. They will get support for such institutions from the bourgeoisie. So Bhosla Military School, or now all the military schools that are being built, most of them are under the tutelage of RSS. They will systematically train their cadre to go into the different institutions of state apparatus, including bureaucracy, including armed forces, including police, including judiciary, including even media, which is not the formal part of bourgeois apparatus, but an informal part of bourgeois state apparatus. So they will infiltrate and percolate into all the parts of bourgeois state apparatus. And through this, they will perform a long protracted positional warfare, consolidating their positions in the state and the society. This is the second most important characteristic feature of fascism. Now, they can come in government and they can go out of the government. But even when they lose elections and when they go out of the government, their consolidated positions in the society and their consolidated positions in the apparatus of bourgeois state, that is not finished. That is not gone. And even when in power, they don't do away with the shell of bourgeois democracy, because if they do away with the shell of the bourgeois democracy, there is only one eventual conclusion for fascism: complete destruction, just like it happened in Germany in Italy. So they don't need to do it. Now, this brings us to the third peculiar feature of fascism in the 21st century. When the first experiments of fascism happened in the first part of the 20th century, we were still in the stage of imperialism, and the bourgeoisie was becoming more and more reactionary. In the words of Lenin, the Republican bourgeoisie and the democratic bourgeoisie was becoming more and more reactionary. It was losing all its Republican and democratic potential. But still, in the 1920s and 1930s, the bourgeoisie as a class and the bourgeois state retained at least some of its democratic potential. It is not without reason that even forces like de Gaulle in France were part of the anti-fascist resistance movement. The same de Gaulle and the same military generals of de Gaulle who were involved after the Second World War in the most brutal and barbaric repression of Algerian national movement, they were at the same time also part of the anti-fascist resistance movement. This is only one symptom of the fact that bourgeois state and the bourgeoisie as a class in 1920s and 1930s, even though it was in the process of losing all of its democratic potential, still retained some of its democratic potential. And that is why this democratic potentialities of the remaining democratic potentialities of bourgeoisie as a class and bourgeois state made it necessary for fascists, which characterize an exceptional form of bourgeois regime, they were obliged to do away with the shell of the bourgeois democracy. Because even the shell of bourgeois democracy, due to remaining bourgeois democratic potential, it posed some kind of hindrance or some kind of obstruction to all those functions that fascists were given by history. All those functions that fascists were supposed to perform in the period of political crisis of bourgeois state. And that is why fascism as a state project existed in a very different form in the early 20th century. It was a state project where the fascisation of a state, the fascist transformation of state, took place as an event. The fascist vanguard, when in power, introduced set of exceptional laws and did away with even the form of bourgeois democracy. They completely banned and ended the formal aspects of bourgeois democracy also, which includes the bourgeois elections, the bourgeois parliament, the bourgeois legislative assemblies, various democratic bourgeois institutions like watchdogs, different kind of watch. For example, we have election commission in our country. So all these things were completely destroyed by introducing a set of exceptional laws. Because why it happened in that way? Because the bourgeoisie as a class and the bourgeois state as an institution and apparatus, they still retained some of their democratic potentialities, even though it was under the process of losing all of its democratic potentialities in this stage of imperialism, but it still retained some of it. And this remaining democratic potential of the bourgeoisie and the bourgeois state posed a challenge, posed a hindrance or obstruction to the fascist project. And that is why fascist project in the early 20th century was obliged or compelled to destroy even the shell of the bourgeois democracy. Now it is not so. In the period of neoliberal uh, capitalism, neoliberal globalization, and many scholars, Marxist scholars, have worked on this. The inherent antagonism of neoliberal phase of capitalist development with democracy and democratic institutions, even from the bourgeois standpoint. I'm talking about bourgeois democracy and bourgeois democratic institutions. So you can read Ellen Weekson's Wood, for example. You can read many such Marxist scholars who have talked about the complete, decline of bourgeois democracy in the period of neoliberal capitalism. So the democratic potential or democratic potentialities of bourgeoisie as a class and bourgeois state has become so negligible, and they have declined to such an extent that now the shell of bourgeois democracy or the form of bourgeois democracy no longer poses an obstruction or hindrance or threat to the fascist functions. The fascists can do everything that they were able to do in the 20th century without doing away with the shell of bourgeois democracy. The 10 years of Modi's rule bear testimony to this fact that even without doing away with the shell of bourgeois democracy, even with retaining the bourgeois elections and parliament and legislative assembly, you can finish the content, the democratic content of bourgeois system, the capitalist system, to such an extent that now there is only shell that remains. The content is in a constant process of disintegration. So there is no, and this also includes the fact that now there is no need to amend the constitution. Many people are saying that if the fascists come, they don't need to. All the fascist sins that they have committed in the last 10 years, everything was constitutional. From uplifting the 370, from CA/NRC, everything was done within the ambit of Indian constitution, the democratic potential of which has been over magnified by liberals. It is one of the least democratic constitutions in the world. And that is why it is that much thick, because it gives you one right by one hand, but it takes the same right by the other hand. So that is why for every, right, there is a contra element in the same constitution. So anyway, so that is why now fascism as a state project cannot be visualized as an event. The fascist transformation of state now is an ongoing project which will never come to end. It is an eternally ongoing project as long as capitalism remains in its neoliberal phase, in the era of long recession. Fascisation of state, fascist transformation of state is going to be an ongoing project forever. It will come to an end only with a workers' revolution, a socialist revolution, an establishment of proletarian dictatorship and socialist system. Now, the immediate task against fascism is not restoration of some form of bourgeois democracy, because formally bourgeois democracy has not been abandoned. When bourgeois democracy was formally abandoned and working class movement faced a complete destruction in the 1930s and 1920s in Germany and Italy and some parts of the Western Europe, the Comintern, before this complete destruction was completed, Comintern came up with the line of United Front of Working Class. United Front of Working Class was supposed to include all the revolutionary and radical communist forces, but not the Social Democrats and not the liberal bourgeoisie. This was the line of 1927. But when Hitler introduced the exceptional law, when the complete destruction of working class movement, which was a very strong working class movement in Italy and Germany, due to the failure of communist, why communist failed, that is a different issue of discussion. I would ask Vedika to organize a discussion on that also. And due to the betrayal of revisionist and social democrats, working class movement was completely destroyed. And when the shell of bourgeois democracy too was given up, then uh, they came up with the line of Popular Front, where the immediate task against fascism was restoration of popular bourgeois or people's democratic governments. That was the line of Popular Front. Now, that line, even then, this line had many problems about which I cannot go into detail, but now that line cannot work. This much is very certain, that now no part of bourgeoisie is going to be part of general anti-fascism. We can form front with various bourgeois forces or social democratic forces based on particular issues, but there cannot be any general anti-fascist front of the same kind, of the kind of Popular Front. Now we have to revive the line of United Front of Working Class in a new. You have to, invent a new version of the line of United Front of Working Class. But to this facet, I'll talk tomorrow. Today, the third characteristic that I was discussing is this. Now, fascism is no more a state project in the same sense. It is a state project in a different sense. The fascisation of state will not take place as an event now. It will be an ongoing process due to the changes in the nature and the character of economic crisis and the modus operandi of capitalist system that I just discussed as the first and second features. The fourth, these are the objective situation due to which fascist forces do not need to do away with the shell or the form of bourgeois democracy. But there is also a subjective factor. The Walter Benjamin talked about redemptive activity, the activity which redeems you. This is nothing but the minimization of errors. Walter Benjamin talked about the way in which revolutionary communists learn from their previous experience, from their previous mistakes, and redeem themselves in the next stage of revolutionary experiments. That's what he called redemptive activity. But to assume that only revolutionary communists learn from their past, to assume that only revolutionary communists learn from their mistakes or their past experience would be a great, it would be like fooling ourselves. Even the reactionary political movements and ideologies and organizations, they learn from their past. And fascists also learned from their past. And they reached this conclusion that if you do away with the form of bourgeois democracy, if you do away with the shell of the bourgeois democracy, then there is only one possible outcome for you. That is complete destruction, as we witnessed in Germany and Italy. Now, the complete destruction of fascism and Nazism in Italy and Germany, respectively, did not happen only because of the Second World War. There was a very strong resistance movement led by communists as well as anarchists, and certain radical elements of bourgeois forces was being conducted in these countries. And ultimately, it led, in combination with the attack of Soviet Union and Allied forces, in principle, due to Soviet Union's revolutionary war, it ultimately led to complete destruction of fascism and Nazism in Italy and Germany, respectively, in such a way that even today, openly doing a fascist politics in Germany and Italy is very difficult. And in many Western countries, it's very difficult. Now we know that certain neo-fascist organizations are emerging. They are practicing xenophobic variety of fascism, but even they had to remain behind the shadows for a long time. And even today, they cannot directly claim allegiance to the ideology of Hitler and Mussolini. They are very apologetic about it. They are saying all the things that Hitler and Mussolini were saying, but their reference points and their context and their terminology and their lingo is very, very different. And they are obliged for that. So fascism and Nazism were destructed in such a way. They underwent a process of complete destruction after the during and after the Second World War in Italy and Germany and Western Europe in such a way that they were thrown off the stage of history for a long time to come. It was only in the 1990s that we saw the new sproutings of neo-fascist politics, like the politics of Jorge Haider, or the politics of National Front in France, or the politics of this organization in Italy, I'm forgetting its name, and many such organizations in different countries. The politics of that Greek fascist Golden Dawn, the Greek fascist organization, but they too are very shamefaced and apologetic in claiming direct allegiance to the 20th century fascism. They are couching their entire politics in an entirely new terminology. It is only after analysis that you can, penetrate across the veneer or the facade of their terminology and reach the essence and see that it is the same good old fascist politics. So that is what is important to understand here. And this, due to this lesson, the fascist vanguard also understood that there is no, first of all, neither is there any need to do away with the shell of the bourgeois democracy, because bourgeois democracy itself has become so bereft of its democratic content that you can maintain the shell of bourgeois democracy and do everything that the 20th century fascists did. Secondly, it is not desirable, because once you do away with the shell of the bourgeois democracy, the only outcome that you are faced with is complete destruction and pushing into the oblivion of history. So that is why neither is it necessary nor is it desired. And this brings us to the last characteristic feature of fascism. So due to all these factors, fascism has become more or less a permanent feature of late capitalist society, the capitalist society of the neoliberal phase of imperialist state. It might come in and out and go out of power, but it will continue to maintain its consolidated positions in the state and society, and would rise to governmental power repeatedly with increased aggressiveness and ferocity, just like in paroxysms. Oh, what do you call paroxysm? Dora padna? Fits, just like fits. In fits which come with increased ferocity and increased aggressiveness. That has been the story of Indian fascism since last 4 decades. If you look at the history of Indian fascism, especially since Ram Janmabhoomi movement, because fascism became a reactionary social movement only in the 1980s. Fascist organization and ideology existed since the colonial period itself, but fascism lacked all the preconditions to become a reactionary social movement before 1980. It was the first crisis of public sector capitalism and world crisis of world capitalism, which created the economic context in which a large portion of middle classes and small capitalist class was faced with economic insecurity and uncertainty, which was irritated and driven into blind reaction due to this threat, and which was ultimately whose fears and whose concerns were misarticulated in a communal fashion by the BJP and RSS, the Sangh Parivar, with this Ram Janmabhoomi movement, which was supposed to end the problem of Muslims and which was supposed to end the problem of economic and social insecurity, etc., by, if you will, with a magic wand. And that same thing happened with the rise of Modi. So there are many milestones. One is Ram Janmabhoomi movement. The other is the destruction of Babri Masjid. Then the formation of 3 Bajpayee government, first for 13 days, then for 13 months, and then for 5 years. Then the Gujarat genocide, and then the rise of Narendra Modi to power in 2014. These are different paroxysms or fits where we see Indian fascism rising to power, Indian fascism performing a fascisation of society and state with increased ferocity and aggressiveness in each round, and even when not in government, remaining and staying as a force to reckon with within the apparatus of the state as well as within the crevices of civil society. These are the five important elements of or peculiarities of 21st century fascism. So we need to understand that even when a Congress government comes or the third party, third front government or coalition government comes, it is not going to take any decisive step to rein in the fascist forces, the fascist goons and the Sangha Parivar. Why? Because of two reasons. One, the bourgeoisie would not allow Congress government or any India bloc government to ban RSS or take any stringent action against fascism. It was proven when the Congress government came in power in Karnataka and backtracked from its promise of banning the Bajrang Dal. And second, all the other representatives of the bourgeoisie also lack the political will to take any stringent action against RSS or fascism when they are not in government. And third reason is the deep infiltration of Sangh Parivar in the state apparatus itself. To such an extent that when there are large scale riots, any Congress or third front government, even they are very limited in their strength to control these riots because the armed forces and the police and the judiciary and the bureaucracy is so much infiltrated by the fascist forces, you can call it an internal takeover. So, due to this, we need to understand that today, fascist forces, the moment I will conclude here, fascist forces can come in and go out of governmental power, but their consolidated positions within the state apparatus and the civil society will remain. And therefore, the fascisation of state or the fascist transformation of state apparatus is not going to happen as an event brought about by some introduction of exceptional laws, a set of exceptional laws, and giving away the shell of bourgeois democracy and the form of bourgeois democracy. There is no need for that, either subjectively or objectively. It will happen in a different way. The way that we are witnessing since the last 4 or 5 decades in the Indian capitalist republic. So here I will end about the generalities and peculiarities of fascism and what this means for changes in the strategy of the working class against fascism. What are the tasks of working class resistance, revolutionary working class, faced with this new kind of fascist rise? That is the topic of tomorrow's discussion. I would heartily thanks all of you that you have listened to this presentation so patiently. I would end my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhinav. But yeah, still, we don't thank each other. We still have questions and answers and tomorrow's session. Please take a break. I have few announcements to make. Dear friends, so we have listened to the first part of the talk today. While we have the way forward, the tasks of the proletariat for tomorrow, today we can have further discussion on what has been spoken by Comrade Abhinav today by means of sending some questions wherever you have some questions, you need some clarity. But the question should be related to the topic that we have discussed today. On way forward and what should be done by the communist parties, such things we can discuss tomorrow. You can post your questions. Those who are following the discussion on Discord, you can post your questions here in this text channel. If you see on the left side, there is a heading text channels. Under that, you can see two channels. The first one is to post, now it is renamed questions and information. So now you can post your questions on this text channel named questions information. And those friends who are following the discussion on YouTube and Facebook, you can post your questions in the concerned comment boxes. Our moderators will take those questions and present to the speaker. Then friends, we have YouTube social media handles to inform the members about the discussions and talks in Vedika. You can follow the discussions by means of these social media handles. If you look at questions and information text channel, our moderator Comrade Amulya has just posted the links. You can see the links for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. please subscribe the social media handles in order to get the information regularly. And we are also running WhatsApp groups to share the resource material shared by the speakers and also to inform about the upcoming Vedika discussion topics. Now, Comrade Amulya has posted the WhatsApp group link here. You can join the WhatsApp group by means of these links if you have not joined yet. And then there is a open forum, of course. This operates in Telugu. So for those friends who have joined only for this talk, may not be really interesting because most of the discussions are happening in Telugu. But for the sake of your information, we have a text channel called Open Forum, where we can go on discussing certain topics related to Marxist theory and practice. These discussions can continue even when the session is not progressing. So this is about the channels. Okay, some friends are typing. So friends, you can post your questions, and Telugu, those friends who are our regular members, those who are used to post their questions in Telugu, you can post the questions in Telugu, no problem. తెలుగులో పోస్ట్ చేసేవాళ్ళు తెలుగులోనే పోస్ట్ చేయండి మిత్రులారా. ఆ ప్రశ్నలు కూడా కామ్రేడ్ అభినవ్కి ఇంగ్లీష్లో ప్రజెంట్ చేస్తాము. Those questions posted in Telugu can be presented to Comrade Abhinav in English. So posting questions in Telugu is not a problem since there are many regular members who can post in Telugu. Now, Comrade Abhinav, we have got our first question here. If you are ready, I will present it to you.
So should I answer one by one?
No. I will read out. The question.
No, I can read the questions. Left. Okay.
Yeah. Left. But the thing is, like it's good for the moderator to read it out. You can, since you are able to see it, you can read it for yourself. But for the sake of recording purposes, it is good for the moderator to read out the question.
Okay. Please do.
Okay. So left. Had the NDA alliance not won and India bloc was able to form government, would the new government have found it difficult to remove those people from power that have permeated the social fabric and positions in state, and why? So I think towards the end of the talk you were just mentioning it, so it's a chance to elaborate.
Yeah, so I think even if India bloc had won the elections and formed the government, they could only make a quantitative difference, not a qualitative difference, because the infiltration of RSS and the fascist forces in the state apparatus, and this is proven correct by the history of Indian capitalism in the last 40-50 years also, that first of all, the bourgeois forces lack the will. Any other non-fascist bourgeois government lacks the will to, purge the state apparatus of fascist elements. And in society, it is even more difficult. The grand network of institutions that the RSS has built, from the level of shakhas to schools, to military schools, to reform institutions, to cooperative institutions and all of that, there is no way to illegalize that within the bourgeois framework. There is no way to do away with that in the bourgeois framework. There was two specific instances when RSS was banned. And those were very, very peculiar interregnums. One was the assassination of Gandhi, and second was the emergency when not only RSS, many other forces were banned. Except these two instances, you won't find any attempt on the part of any other non-fascist bourgeois party when in government to purge the state apparatus of fascism. So I would it's not a speculation, rather it's a lesson of history that any bourgeois government in India, non-fascist bourgeois government in India, has never really tried to make any qualitative difference in that regard. They are not going to purge these people from these positions within the state apparatus, and the state apparatus includes everything from bureaucracy to armed forces to police to judiciary, because there is no tangible way for any bourgeois government. Only a proletarian power can actually, because that is, proletarian power comes into existence on the basis of smashing the bourgeois state. So any other government, bourgeois government, cannot do it. So you can stay assured that even if in next election, or if the NDA government falls and India bloc government is gone, there won't be any qualitative difference. There might be some quantitative ups and downs, but state apparatus is not going to be purged by from fascist elements by any bourgeois government.
Yeah, now we have a question on YouTube.
This answer is not complete. Left comrade has asked why. Because for the very simple reason, in the period of long recession, the bourgeoisie needs fascism, whether in power or not, whether in government or not. They need fascist forces in the civil society, entrenched in the civil society and entrenched in the state apparatus. That is why it is not about the will of Revant Reddy, that Siddaramaiah, that they did not ban Bajrang Dal. The Kannada bourgeoisie itself would not allow the Congress state government to do something like that. That is one of the living example of why it cannot happen. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, there is a comment on YouTube, and there are other questions too. Uday Chandra Roy comments that Indian context is far too different from most other states. The diversity and historical socio-cultural movements must be taken into account. So this is a comment. In fact, you spoke of the peculiarities of fascism. If you would like to respond on this, you can, or else I will go to the next person.
Yeah, there is a small clarification here. Sometimes when we are studying Indian society, and this is a tendency in all communists around the world in different countries, they have their own country exceptionalism. They think that the variety in the social fabric, and the fact that India is a multinational country, the fact that there have been various social reform movements by the likes of Ayyangali and Periyar and Ambedkar and Jyotiba Phule, etc., and there have the assumption is that in other countries, the history was completely bereft of such resistance movement or social reform movements or the plurality of the fabric of society. This assumption itself is incorrect. You can talk about the quantitative difference in the variety or in the plurality of the social fabric of different societies, but it is always there. People talk about Russia, for example. In Russia also there was a strong fascist movement. In Russia also it's a multinational country, it was a multi-ethnic country, it was a multi-religious country. And there had been traditions of resistance movements since the time of peasant rebel called Stepan Razin. And different, pre-Marxian resistance movements were there in the period of Tsar. So I would suggest and advise not to assume that India is exceptional. Every country is unique, that is true. But if you are talking about qualitative features of different societies, you cannot claim any kind of exceptionalism in the case of India. Even in Germany, there were different small national minorities, there were different small ethnic minorities and all. India is different, of course, in certain ways, but to assume that fascism will not be able to rise to power in a proper classical manner, not classical manner, let me rephrase, fascism will not be able to complete its takeover of power just because India is a multinational country or multi-ethnic, multi-religious country and there are regional diversities. That would be very dangerous assumption. It would disarm us from fighting against fascism. Yeah. So that was it.
Yeah. There is a question in Discord from Amulya. How do we understand the role of regional parties like Telugu Desam Party (TDP) in sustaining fascist rule?
Yeah. So if you talk about parties like TDP or parties like Janasena or parties like NCP and Shiv Sena, etc., these parties basically represent the regional big as well as intermediate and small bourgeoisie of their state. And they use all kinds of pragmatism to wrest as much economic resources and as bigger share in the surplus appropriation at national level by various methods. Sometimes they would align with fascism, at others they would align with Congress or some third front government. Their prime motive is basically gaining as bigger a share in economic and political power by using their regional clustering. So they can never be a force on which we can rely, even within the ambit of bourgeois politics. They are not the forces on which we can rely as far as anti-fascist struggle is concerned. Issue-based alliances can be found on anything. But apart from the issue-based alliances, these parties are not trustworthy. They are not credible. They are very incredulous, and one should be very, suspicious about their democratic potential. And that is true specifically about TDP. I mean, the authoritarian tendencies of Chandrababu Naidu and TDP itself is not something which is secret to anybody. Whenever in power, he has used strong arm tactics to deal with people's movement, with working class movement, etc. So I think the role of TDPs should be seen in the broad context of the pragmatic politics that they practice in order to gain more political and economic power based on the clout of their regional bourgeoisie. And if for that, at one point of time, it is necessary to ally with Congress, they will do that. At others, if it is beneficial to ally with the fascists, they will do that. So in that, they don't have any anti-fascist character or potential or character.
Aruna is asking on Discord. You mentioned the propaganda claiming that the fascists will change the constitution, but this campaign is not credible or accurate. The propagandists may argue that people have responded to this campaign in the current election. So how should we respond to it?
See, these propagandists create, it was a very practical consideration that let's create a fear amongst the Dalits and the backward communities that BJP is going to change the constitution. This or that fringe element of BJP might have said that also, because Brahminical hegemony is one of the constituent part of fascist ideology in India. But whatever the propagandists say, and how the masses, due to the fear of change in constitution, especially the Dalit part of Dalit intelligentsia and Dalit middle class, responded to that, doesn't prove that fascists were actually going to change the constitution. How should we respond to it? We should make it clear to them that Indian constitution is not so democratic that it pose a great threat to fashion of state. In fact, in the last 10 years, we can give actual concrete examples where within the ambit of constitutionality, the Indian fascists did everything that they actually did, from introducing CA, from doing away with 370, introducing Disturbed Area Act in certain new districts and areas. All of that was done within the ambit of constitution. So we can prove with facts that constitution is not going to save you from fascism. And in the last 10 years, BJP did not feel the need, and still it doesn't feel the need to change the constitution to fulfill all the functions that it has been given by the reactionary rule. So the only way to respond to that is not increasing any fetish of constitution. We should clearly explain to masses that constitution is not a big hurdle for Indian fascists.
Sujan is asking this on Discord. You mentioned the betrayal of social democratic parties in the fight against fascism in the early 20th century. Can we liken the parliamentary left's participation in India Alliance to such betrayal?
Okay, so as far as the concrete experience goes, you cannot directly, draw a direct parallel between the political behavior of Indian social democrats and revisionists with the European social democrats and revisionists. I would say that had Kautsky been alive, or had Van der Velde been alive today, they would have held their head in shame by seeing the behavior of the likes of CPI, CPM, and CPI-ML Liberation, which is characterized by complete capitulation to bourgeoisie, complete capitulation to even the reactionary forces of bourgeoisie. So the betrayal, what is this betrayal of social democracy if we are talking qualitatively, not comparing the exact events, how the European social democrats committed the betrayal and how the Indian social democrats are committing their betrayal. If we are not drawing direct parallels between the exact actions, then the essence of betrayal is what? The essence of betrayal is that the social democracy systematically prevents the working class, at least the part of the working class where they have influence, a considerable part of the organized working class and a not so considerable part of the unorganized working class. They prevent this working class from becoming a political class. They systematically prevent this working class from moving beyond the ambit of economism, reformism, and trade unionism. And when the working class is only caring about its immediate short term economic interests and it is not caring about its long term general political interest, then the working class is committing a historical blunder. That historical blunder is that it is disarming itself from becoming the political leader of all the working masses, all the allied classes of revolution. If the working class has to become the political leader of the entire working masses, which is an essential precondition of consummating the revolution, then the working class is bound to be defeated by fascism. So it is very important that we understand qualitatively what the role of social democracy is. The role of social democracy is limiting the working class politics within the ambit of reformism, economism, and trade unionism. In that sense, if we are talking qualitatively, parliamentary left's participation in India Alliance is one thing, but their general role is precisely that of limiting the working class revolutionary politics.
Okay, Tirupalu on Discord. The fascist party which understood religious way will not work out in future. Is it possible for them to take other tactics?
I would say that just on the basis of the result of one election that Ram Mandir didn't work in their favor or communal frenzy did not work in their favor to the extent that they were expecting. On the basis of this particular short-term result, to assume that religious frenzy and communalization will not work in their favor in the future would be a folly. Because even in 2004 and 2009 elections, they tried to stoke the flames of communalism a lot using the Gujarat genocide and all. And still they were able to reap the benefits of communalization in 2014. So we need to see the things in a longue durée fashion rather than in a short term fashion. In one election, I would suggest that BJP got even those many seats only because of a systematic communalization of the petty bourgeois masses as well as parts of working population. But yes, I agree that it did not work to their favor to the extent that they had expected. But on the basis of this, to speculate whether they will use some other tactic, it is very unlikely. They will have to start from the scratch by constructing a new imaginary enemy, a new constructed false enemy that would involve too much of work, and that would also not work because the minority which is constructed as the false enemy or imaginary enemy must be sizable enough. So you cannot construct, for example, the African minority living in coastal Gujarat as the constructed enemy. You can only construct Muslims as the imagined enemy in the specific historical context of India, irrespective of the fact whether it worked properly in this election or not. It will and it might work in the future if revolutionary forces are not diligent enough in their anti-communal and secular revolutionary propaganda.
Okay, Raghu on Discord. What is the contribution of imperialism, an external agency, and the feudal culture manifested as caste hierarchy, an internal agency, in the rise of Indian fascism? Please explain.
Yes, so I would say that in one of the peculiar feature of globalization period, and one of the peculiar features of Indian capitalism and its relation to imperialism, is that Indian bourgeoisie is a junior partner of imperialism in general. Junior partner of imperialism in general means it is not a comprador, it is not a puppet or agent of this or that imperialist country. It is politically independent and partially economic dependent. But at the same time, imperialism also is partially economically dependent on countries like India, which are big, relatively backward post-colonial capitalist countries. And imperialism is dependent for many things. One is a market for realization of the surplus value produced. Second is a site of profitable investment, because organic composition of capital is lower in countries like India as compared to countries like Germany, Japan, or US or France. So, since there is the OCC, the organic composition is lower in countries like India, they become a favored destination for export of capital and investment of capital for reaping higher profits. And third is cheap raw materials and cheap labor. All these three factors are the regulating factors which determine the relation of imperialism with Indian capitalism, which is that of a junior partner, where Indian capitalist class also takes a share from the appropriated surplus at the international level. At the international level, it is a junior partner in the appropriated surplus, and at the national level, it is the senior partner in the appropriated surplus. So, this particular relation of imperialism is has something very specific vis-a-vis rise of fascism. Why? Because neoliberal capitalist policies are a general consensus of the capitalist world, including the advanced capitalist world as well as the relatively backward capitalist countries like Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, Indonesia, India, etc. And in these countries, that is why imperialism is always supporting different kinds of authoritarian regime. Whether it is quasi-fascist regime of Erdogan in Turkey, or it is the quasi-fascist authoritarian regime of Bolsonaro in Brazil, or the rabid far-right regime of Duterte in Philippines, they are always supporting this. But even other neoliberal bourgeois forces, which are not fascist, they are supporting them also. Because in terms of economic policies, the difference between the policies of fascist bourgeoisie and the non-fascist representatives of bourgeoisie is only quantitative, not qualitative. So imperialism always likes an authoritarian government in all the so-called third world countries, and as an external agency, it always supports such regimes. That is true, more than the other forms of bourgeoisie. As far as feudal culture is concerned, I would say the caste system and caste hierarchy itself has nothing feudal about it. In fact, caste system came into existence in Indian subcontinent before the rise of feudalism. It came into the existence in the mid-Gangetic plains in the latter half of the early Vedic period, when feudalism was nowhere to be seen. The beginning of feudalism can be seen from the 1st century AD and 3rd century AD, with the collapse of Mauryan Empire in North India, and collapse of emergence of Gupta Empire in North India, and with the emergence of various so-called Shudra kings. Shudra kingdoms in the peninsular southern India. And that was the period when caste system had already come into existence. So what is the relation between different modes of production and caste system? Caste system emerged in a particular mode of production in India, but every new mode of production articulated and adopted and adapted and molded and remolded the caste system. So caste system in itself is a ideology of social oppression. It is a form of social oppression, but it is co-opted and molded and remolded by every new social formation. So today, the caste system that we are witnessing, it is not a feudal caste system. It's a capitalist caste system. Now, this is a very interesting topic of discussion. This is another possible topic that I would humbly suggest to the organizers of Vedika Study Circuit to organize a separate session on. But of course, this Brahminical ideology, which has been refashioned and modeled along the capitalist lines, is one of the contributing factor in the rise of Indian fascism. There is no doubt about it.
Ashay and discard. Will the lack of complete majority for the BJP result in any quantitative increase in democratic space for working class struggles?
Uh, yes, I think in the very first part of the presentation, where I was discussing the results of election, I talked about four possibilities. In which the during while discussing the first possibility, I said that yes, there is a possibility for increase in democratic space for people's struggles. Whether working class struggles will find more democratic space, I am highly suspicious of that. But in general, for the rights of minorities, for the rights of general people, that is what we call democratic rights and civil rights of the people, maybe we might witness some quantitative increase due to the pushes and pulls of a coalition government. If this coalition government continues to be in power, we might witness some quantitative changes in the democratic space for people in general. In particular, for the working class, I'm not so sure because even the previous Congress government was not so democratic when it came to the working class struggles. So, about that, I'm a little suspicious.
Blackbeard on Discard. How deep has revisionism seeped into the so-called communist parties? And is the adventurist Maoist movement of tribals and working class in areas like Bastar a valid way of dealing with rise of fascism instead? So, to me, it seems it is for tomorrow, but you can take the call. If you want to respond, you can respond.
Yeah, I would just respond very briefly. One is the so-called communist parties. They are revisionist parties, and it is not very useful to measure the degree to which revisionism has seeped into them. They are, in terms of their ideological line and political line, they are revisionist parties. Revisionism simply boils down to one thing: to give up the Leninist thesis of state and revolution, that proletariat cannot come to power without smashing the bourgeois state. That is the basic thesis that they give up either in form or in content, definitely, but sometimes in forms also. For example, liberation people will say, no, no, we will smash state, but now is not the state. Now is the stage to do parliamentary criticism. But in essence, they have given up that thesis. So that is very clear that the revisionist parties are revisionist parties. How bad is their revisionism? How far revisionism has seeped into them is, I think, it's a non-question. But as far as the adventurist Maoist movement of sections of tribals in certain areas like Bastar is concerned, they are completely at loss with dealing with the fascism. First of all, they have serious problems in characterizing the present government as fascist, because the classical Marxist Leninist Maoist position is that fascism is the most naked form of barbaric dictatorship of the most reactionary faction of financial industrial bourgeoisie. But if they believe that a financial industrial bourgeoisie is in power in India, then it's not comprador. But they believe Indian bourgeoisie is comprador. So if Indian bourgeoisie is comprador, it can be authoritarian, it can be totalitarian, it can be completely bereft of democracy, but they cannot be fascist, because fascism per se is expression of the rule of industrial financial bourgeoisie, the most reactionary blocks and factions of financial industrial bourgeoisie. So they have no way, the Indian Maoists in double quotes, they have no way of theorizing Indian fascism. Once you don't have a revolutionary theory about Maoism, you cannot have a revolutionary movement against fascism. So if you need to have a revolutionary scientific understanding of fascism, and that Indian Maoists are not in a position to develop. They're caught in a very laughable position. They cannot call Indian regime fascist because it's a comprador bourgeoisie and India is semi-feudal, semi-colonial. And if they don't call it, they cannot develop a thesis of anti-fascist resistance. If they call it a fascist bourgeoisie, then they have problems with their comprador bourgeoisie thesis. So I think they are in a catch-22 situation. And due to that, they are very unlikely to develop any. And moreover, they don't have a revolutionary mass line. Masses fight against fascism, not armed brigades of certain small sections of people. It is masses that must be organized. And there, they completely fail because they are adventurous, not revolutionary mass liners.
Vivek, aspire and discard, there is a probability that the Führer cult of Modi will go down, and if it happens, what will be its consequences?
Well, it will be replaced by a new Führer cult. So you don't know because see, if you look at liberals, when faced with Modi, they remember Lal Krishna Advani and Murli Manohar Joshi with nostalgia. When they were faced with Lal Krishna Advani in the 2004 election, because he was their prime ministerial candidate, they were nostalgically reminiscing about Vajpayee. When they were faced with Vajpayee, they were nostalgically reminiscing about Shyama Prasad Mukherjee and Deen Dayal Upadhyay. That is a liberal disease. You can always stay assured as long as fascism survives as an ideological, political trend and movement. One fascist Führer figure can be replaced by another. So if Modi's Führer cult goes down, if the NDA government continues and Modi Shah combine are obliged and compelled due to a variety of factors to give leeway to forces like alliance partners like Nitish and Chandrababu Naidu, eventually they will come up with a new Führer cult based on some kind of new fascist genocide in some state or some area or something like that. I cannot speculate about that, but you can be very sure about it. You can be fairly certain about it as long as fascism survives, because Führer cult is one of the constitutive features of fascism. So there will be a supreme leader, whether Modi survives as that or some new figure arises under certain peculiar circumstances. We cannot speculate, but it will happen.
Shivam on Discard. Hello, comrade. In this election, we saw Modi trying to put Muslims against SC, ST, OBC regarding reservations. Can we say that Hindutva fascism is caste neutral despite having a certain Brahmanical character?
Yes, I think Shivam has raised a very pertinent point. It is true that due to its Hindutva fascist ideology, it has certain mobility in terms of this or that caste groups to ally with. It can sometimes talk against Dalit, it can sometimes mobilize Dalits against Muslims and the false enemy. It sometimes can oppose OBC reservation and talk against OBC, and at others it can mobilize different OBC castes against Muslims, etc. Because the Brahminical ideology itself has nothing to do with particular. It's an ideology based on purity and pollution to divide the masses along caste lines. Now that lines can be drawn at different locations depending upon the particular situation of political class struggle. So in that sense, it has a certain mobility. It has Brahminical ideology as one of its constituent elements and component parts, fascist ideology in India. But the line uh, that has to be drawn in terms of caste-based mobilizations, that line is not rigid. They can draw the line in more than one ways. So yes, you are alluding to something very real.
Velamala Avinash on YouTube. Please tell the possible methods of redemption activities in an order.
In an order means?
In a order. Yeah, maybe like he's asking you way forward ways to combat fascism. That is what I understand from this question.
Yeah, if that is the question, I think it is better to discuss the answer tomorrow, because that is precisely the topic of tomorrow's discussion.
Yeah.
But the way in which revolutionary politics can redeem itself in the present contemporary political situation, where we are witnessing the rise of a new type of fascism, a new method, modus vivendi and modus operandi of fascism, we'll have to devise new ways of working class movement also. I will stop there, because that is beyond that I would be venturing into the arena of tomorrow's discussion.
Okay, Arun Sanku on YouTube. In relation to success of BJP, there is dominant narrative in circulation regarding Dalits called subaltern Hindutva. Can you throw some light on this?
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with that, but yes, subaltern Hinduism is a very important thing to consider. There are certain intellectuals in Hindi Patti also, Hindi belt also, who are talking about the subaltern Hinduism because of the increased appeal of Hinduism in different layers of Dalit population. One of the labs of such experiment is Gujarat, and another lab is the different states of North India like Haryana, UP, Bihar, where with the decline of the politics of the likes of BSP, Mayawati, space has been left empty. Now that space is being filled by new kind of more radical versions of the Kashiram style politics like Ravan, Chandrasekhar Ravan, and the rest of the space is also being hegemonized by the BJP and RSS, and they have done a very systematic and very long-term planned work among the tribals and Dalits in different parts of the country through Vanvashi Kalyan Ashram and all these organizations, where they have systematically created Muslims as the principal enemy of Dalits. And in that, they have also tried to incorporate Dalits within the fold of a Semitized idea of Hindutva society, Hindu Rashtra, a Semitization of Hinduism, a Semitization of Hindu society, because Hinduism itself is a very peculiar creature, a very particular kind of animal that requires a separate discussion. But precisely because of the non-monolithic and non-homogeneous character of this ideology, Hinduism, RSS needed to semitize Hinduism, to create a unitary idea of Hinduism. And in that project, they are also trying to win over different factions of Dalit population using the insecurities and uncertainties created by capitalist system and using the image of false enemy in the figure of Muslims. And that they have done and now this trend which has emerged among Dalit populations of certain states where Dalits have emerged as one part of Dalit population has emerged as a social base of RSS politics. That's what they're calling subaltern Hinduism, I guess. So in that sense, it is very dangerous, and it has all the revolutionary and progressive forces need to resist that and reveal the true Brahminical character of Hindutva forces.
Okay, Ibrahim Husseini on YouTube, it seems to be a comment. It's again a contradiction in capitalism that bourgeois needs fascism, but fascists are becoming an existential threat for non-fascist bourgeois parties.
Yes, that is true. It's a contradiction, but they are becoming a threat for certain non-fascist certain, not all, but certain non-fascist bourgeois parties, not any faction of bourgeois class. So you have to make a distinction between different blocks and factions of bourgeoisie and their political representatives. Bourgeois parties and bourgeois class, there is a relation of relative autonomy between them. So even if fascist bourgeois party becomes poses an existential threat before other representatives of bourgeois class, it doesn't mean that they are posing a threat to any faction of bourgeois class itself. So at the level, ostensibly, it's a contradiction, but if you look deeper, it is very consistent. It is very possible, especially in the times of capitalist crisis, because all the factions of bourgeoisie, they drift towards fascism. They are driven into the arms of reaction. They are driven into the arms of fascism. So even those factions which give rise to other forms of bourgeois representatives, these factions also drift towards fascist reaction. So the fact that fascism becomes poses an existential threat to other non-fascist bourgeois parties and bourgeois representatives doesn't mean that fascism poses a threat to any faction of bourgeoisie.
Hrithik Rayans on YouTube, did the role of RSS decline in present time as BJP president said we didn't need RSS and we are more capable?
Well, I would say that is more of talk, less of content. The RSS has been continuously active even in the present election campaign for BJP. The relative autonomy of the electoral fronts of fascists and the basic fascist organization is a fact. That is true. There will always be contradictory relations, but these contradictions are not of antagonistic kind. These are friendly contradictions based on the assessment of real political events of the present political situation. These contradictions, in most likelihood, are not going to develop into an antagonistic contradiction. So I would not take Nadda's statement very seriously. The RSS is very much there. It is very much there as a looming shadow behind all the activities of BJP as an electoral front of RSS and Modi Shah combined as the leading figures of this electoral front. I would not read too much into it.
We have answered all the questions that we have received on Discord and social media handles, Abhinav.
Okay.
If you can play concluding remarks for today's talk and kind of curtain raisers for tomorrow, then we can conclude the session.
Okay, so comrades, from the present day's presentation, I'm not going to repeat the salient points and all. The only important point here is that the changes in the modus vivendi and modus operandi of fascism in the 21st century, it becomes it's not an academic exercise. It's not an intellectualist enterprise where we can talk about it in different intellectual forums. These are very living questions for revolutionary working class movement. If we don't understand the changes in the modus vivendi and modus operandi of fascism in the 21st century, or to be more accurate, since the last quarter of the 20th century, we would not be able to devise the strategy and general tactics of anti-fascist proletarian struggle. If we want to devise the particular and effective methods of anti-fascist struggle, that some of us are also practicing in certain areas in this country with a little bit of success and with a little bit of failure. But in order to understand these changes, these shifts in the mode of life and mode of working of fascism in the neoliberal phase of imperialist state, we won't be able to devise new strategies. There are trends within the Indian communist movement who are waiting for Godot to arrive, who are waiting that Indian fascism will do exactly the things that Italian and German fascism and Nazism did. Then they are going to be waiting for eternity because that day is not going to come. And they would be unable to formulate any strategy of anti-fascist resistance, and they would be obliged and compelled to copy the resolutions of Comintern of 1920s and 1930s and the resolutions and decisions and tactics of various communist groups and parties in Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. That is not going to suffice. We need to understand these changes in order to devise the correct strategy and tactics of anti-fascist struggle today. So it is a very living question, rather a question of existence for entire progressive camp and especially for revolutionary communism. So I hope to have as lively a discussion tomorrow as we had today. There I would conclude my remarks, the concluding remarks, and thanks again.
Thank you, Comrade Abhinav. So, dear friends, we have seen Comrade Abhinav talking on, broadly, he spoke in three parts. In the very first part, he briefly, very quickly, spoke about the possibilities that are lying ahead in the immediate years or immediate months. Then he, in detail, spoke about the general features of fascism, 5 general features, and 5 specific features. Personally, I feel it is very enlightening, especially the last part of the concluding remark. There are certain disagreements and confusions among Indian communists of various streams on defining fascism and coming to a decision whether fascism has arrived in India or not. Some of them are still waiting for kind of things to repeat here that have happened in Germany and Italy. So, in the light of Marxist, Leninist, and Maoist theory, what are the general features of fascism that we can see everywhere, every time, and what are the specific features of fascism that vary based on the time and space? So, thank you, Comrade Abhinav, on behalf of all the members who have attended today's talk. And thank you, dear comrades and friends, who sent your questions and made this discussion fruitful. So, as Comrade Abhinav hoped, I too hope we'll have a very fruitful discussion tomorrow also. We'll meet at 8 p.m. tomorrow. That's all for today, comrades. Bye bye.
Thank you, comments. Bye.
Thank you. You can exit this voice channel. Those friends who have joined today, we need to exit this channel. It appears as a red receiver symbol on some devices, or simply a receiver symbol on some devices. You can see a receiver symbol. By clicking on that, you can exit from the voice channel. So it is advisable to exit the channel.